Today, we honor three artists who have each contributed to documenting the stories at the heart of Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum's mission, and whose collaboration in a series of films over the course of the last 10 years has brought their work to wider audiences and greater acclaim. Tom Horton, Dave Harp, Sandy Cannon-Brown have been working together since 2015 when they produced Beautiful Swimmers Revisited, an hour-long documentary inspired by Warner's Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Beautiful Swimmers, Watermen, Crabs, and the Chesapeake Bay. They have collaborated on 8 more films since then, covering an array of Bay-related topics and issues. Chesapeake Rhythms, which you've now previewed, is the latest of these. A longtime environmental reporter at the Baltimore Sun and columnist for the Bay Journal, Tom Horton authored 8 books about the Bay and has been honored along the way by Chesapeake Bay Foundation, Sierra Club, and others. His lyrical prose has elevated his stewardship message in his writing, much as it has done in this film. Dave Harp's stunning Bay photography has accompanied 5 of Tom Horton's books, and his work has been featured in quite a few national publications, including the New York Times Magazine, Smithsonian, and Audubon. A selection of his work was featured here at Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum in a 2020 special exhibition, Where Land and Water Meet, and a 2010 special exhibition, A Rising Tide in the Heart of the Chesapeake Bay. This museum has become the permanent repository for his extensive photography, numbering in the hundreds of thousands of images, as well as the B-roll for these films. A CBMM volunteer and St. Michael's resident before relocating to Martha's Vineyard in 2020, Sandy Cannon-Brown is an award-winning environmental filmmaker whose work has often featured the Bay and has also taken her across the United States and beyond. The founder and president of Videotakes Incorporated, she has been honored as a woman of vision by Women in Film and Video DC, and adjunct professor of the year by American University. Their repeated collaboration, Tom as the writer and narrative voice, Dave as the photographer and videographer, Sandy as the filmmaker, artfully weaving the content together, have deepened our understanding and appreciation of a fragile and changing Chesapeake Bay and the impact of those changes on communities and individuals who have called this region home. It is fitting then to recognize the contributions of these 3, Tom, Dave, and Sandy, with Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum's Heritage Award, given to broadcast journalist Walter Cronkite, a champion of maritime heritage preservation. The Heritage Award has not been granted since 2015. Other recipients have included naval architect and author Thomas C. Gilmer, designer of the Pride of Baltimore, historian and museum curator Robert H. Burgess, and author William Warner, whose work they revisited for his prize-winning book, Beautiful Swimmers, as well as log canoe preservationist Judge John C. North. The contributions of these 3 have reached wide audiences, and bestowing this honor to award them, we recognize contributions to the preservation of regional culture that fulfill the mission of Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum, preserving and exploring the history, environment, and culture of the entire Chesapeake Bay region, and making this resource available to all. Please join me in congratulating Tom, Dave, and Sandy.
Thinking about this, thought to give you a chance to reflect. This is a big load of work that you have put together over the last decade together, and you keep coming back and working together and coming up with new ideas. So I guess my first thing to put out there to you is How did you all come together, and how does it feel 10 years later, just screening your 9th film?
Sandy can elaborate on this, but she walked in my living room one day and said, you know, it's been 40 years since Warner wrote Beautiful Swimmers, published in 1976. I was a little put out because any journalist worth his salt knows that an anniversary is a great book to sell a story. If the editor wouldn't go for the story, just wait till the 10th, 20th, 40th anniversary. And so, you know, you're right. Nobody has really gone back in 40 years and looked at what's changed with crabs and that. I should note, a couple times a year, people come up to me and congratulate me for winning the Pulitzer Prize. Willie and I were good friends, and he's dead, and I just say thanks.
Tom's absolutely right. That's how it all started. I read Beautiful Swimmers, and as a filmmaker, I could see it, and I wanted very much to do a film about that book. So I went to, and when I got to the end of the book, if you go to the afterword, the first sentence talks about his friend, Tom Horton. And I thought, there is my connection, there is my end. So I did go down and nicely ask him to participate, but he said only if his friend Dave Harp could be involved. The rest is history.
Yeah, I signed on as a still photographer to help out a little bit and do what I could. And I think one of the first days we were actually down on Smith Island, I was doing some photos, and Sandy looked at me and said, you know, there's another button on that camera. You can actually shoot moving pictures. I had never shot video before, ever. And that's where it started. And, you know, Sandy certainly changed my life in the last 10 years doing all these films. Tom and I would never have done them without Sandy.
Sandy, and it was pure hell. Dave and I actually got a little snappish for the first time.
Well, and also Richard Anderson. Richard, put your hand up here. Richard does all our final edit for sound and music, which Richard Troxler, another person, produces, and all the color work and audio. And when we did the one film that Sandy didn't work on, that Richard and I, you remember, it was a lot of work. We appreciated Sandy all the more.
Thank you, thank you.
So talk a little bit about Chesapeake Chesapeake Rhythms, and how you ended up on the topic of migration. Because having now seen a body of your work, I can see threads in there, but tell me, how did you come here to this topic?
Well, I've been teaching environmental studies now for 16 years at Salisbury University, and I found going to see swans made one of the best field trips you could imagine, even if they do go in on the sewage treatment ponds at Hurlock, Maryland for the night.
Which we gave credit.
And I had this little open space, so the swans would have a sanctuary, and then they switched to the damn sewage. There went that part of the story, but I just found it a good way to engage students and then talk about the obligations everybody along these vast migratory routes has to ensure that their way stations remain intact. So it's a good teaching tool, and you know, the critters themselves, even eels, are just fascinating.
Yeah, Tom and I met when we were both at the Baltimore Sun in 1980, and were assigned to do a story on Smith Island. And we were learning that we could get out and do these bay stories, and our editors, we'd go out for days, and our editors didn't know where we were, but if we came back with the goods, they were okay with it. So, so we learned how to get out and do that. And, you know, I think early on, and even before that, but the rhythms of the bay are pretty evident if you get out there. There's wind, there are tides, there's the migrations, there's the tide of light that we did a little piece on once. So that those things were evident then. And when it was time to do another film, we were saying, hey, why don't we do migrations? So.
Well, and estuaries are inherently dynamic as hell. And if you want to get more on this, we have a physical oceanographer in the back who taught me all of this stuff. You not only have the tides going in and out, you have the two-layered flow, salt coming in from the ocean, lighter fresh water flowing out on top. You got the wind pushing the water all over the place because the bay's so shallow. You've got wet years and dry years moving the lines of salt and fresh up and down. And then geologically, 90% of the time or so, there's no bay here. The oceans are in their basins. The water's all tied up in the ice 10% of the time. So enjoy it while it lasts.
So I'm happy to take questions if there's anybody in the audience, but I can ask questions all day. So if you are interested in asking a question, feel free to interrupt or make eye contact with me and I will come and get you a microphone.
I just want to say one other thing. Alex Wilkie is in our audience tonight, and she was very kind to spend a couple days with us, as you saw with the shorebirds. Just want to thank you.
So how do you connect with people? I think that's another thing that always strikes me, that you are out there and researching and you're inherently well connected, but you find the people to carry the story forward. And your storytellers are so diverse across the bay in perspective, but it always drives the story home. So how do you find your Alexes?
Well, I mean, it's the nature of journalists to know a little bit about a lot of things. But the most important thing you learn is the people who actually know a lot about things. So from the first day I worked on the Baltimore Sun, I've had my eye out for people across the whole spectrum of the Chesapeake that could tell me stuff. Bill Boycourt over here has taught me most of the stuff, including that about oceanography, including that sea level isn't level. I still can't get my head around that. He swears that the ocean at Bermuda is either 3 meters higher or lower than it is off the mouth of the Chesapeake. But you can talk to Bill about that. I still don't believe it.
So thinking about the journey that you've been on, what's next? I feel like every time we do this and I say, is this it? And then you say, maybe. So is this it? What's next? Also, it's okay to retire. I'm not trying to
No, we're not going to retire.
I'm not forcing
No,
you to a
that's not. I don't think any of us want to quit.
Now, there was a day when we had been in that stream, Deer Creek,
Oh, yeah.
for 2 days with all of Dave's gear, trying to stay upright because it's fast running water, slick bottom, and we're old. And I crawled out of that creek the second day and said, I knew it would come, Dave, but we're too old for this shit. It happened fast.
We'll do a kinder, gentler film next.
Yeah.
All right, I'll take kind.
We don't know. We're kicking around some ideas. If anybody has any, we're like to hear. I'm not ready to quit.
Excellent. Well, I'm excited for the 10th film, whatever it's going to be.
But Sandy had the temerity to move to Martha's Vineyard, so it makes it a little more difficult. But thanks to FedEx and
Thanks to the fact that Dave and Barbara could get to come up for a couple of times and visit.
and write it off.
Aren't we just about at the 50th anniversary of Beautiful Swimmers? We could try.
Been there,
again.
done that.
Yeah.
So what is the process like now to collaborate, now that you are spread further apart? What does it look like to put this film together?
Sandy, yeah.
They go out and do all the hard work in the field, and then they send me all this beautiful stuff to look at and all these interviews to read. So I get the fun part. I'm the very first audience on all of this work. And then I get to decide pretty much what resonates with me and what I think the rest of the world would like to share. So I love this. I mean, I am so honored to work with these brilliant men.
Actually, I was going to say that Dave and Sandy do most of the work because I talk and
That's
I'm a
true,
trivia.
actually.
That's my job. They really put the film together. Yeah.
No, you know, Sandy is really good at taking a lot of information and getting a narrative out of it. It's something that I have a real struggle with. And, you know, I'm happy to go out there and shoot hours and hours of, too many hours maybe, of film, but bringing it back and taking all that information and coming with a concise narrative. Sandy is, I think Tom and I agree that
Well,
it really helps.
well, actually, it starts with Tom. Usually it starts with Tom writing an essay or a print piece, and we use that as the basic structure for deciding how to go with the documentary. So it does start with you.
Well, what I've had to learn is that when you're doing film, the words don't have to carry all the freight. You know, I come from a writing background, and you know, I'm always telling Dave, I got a great idea. Look at this. This will be wonderful. And he says, well, we got to illustrate it, Horton. How do I do? Because it takes so many great pictures to cover just a handful of words. And
Yep.
I still have to remind myself of that. It's just not where I come from.
Yeah, back when we were doing just stills and magazine work and books, I always told Tom that a bad picture is worth 1,000 words. A good picture is worth a lot more.
So in filming, and now that you need so many pictures and so much film to cover that, Dave, what was your process like? Were there any memorable moments? Sometimes when we've talked in the past, you've had some really memorable moments to get particular films. Is there anything from this film that particularly stood out?
A lot. I can go on. The Cox family stands out. They were just such a, and Tom can talk about them too. They were just such a remarkable family that we kept going back because we wanted to see them again. You know, there's some winter scenes in that film, and it looked like we spent a lot of time on that. The snow that year, it was 2 years ago, the entire winter, and I really wanted winter scenes with the swans, was maybe half an hour of snow. And I'm not exaggerating. And I remember telling Barbara, it started snowing. I said, I'm going to head for Blackwater. And I drove down and it was snowing. And then for like 10 minutes, it snowed like hell. And, you know, the slow motion of the swans, the slow motion of the harrier flying in the snow, all of that work with the eagles in the background, all of that was no more than a half an hour. And we used a hell of a lot of it, didn't we?
We used the whole half hour.
Yeah, the Coxes, you know, they're worth a film themselves. I'm not sure they're eager to be filmed that much, but Anna is this amazing combination of creationist or young earth person, she would call it, and totally into all the rest of science. She sent me a 4-page annual letter, kind of the year of the family, and she constructed the whole thing around the periodic table of elements quite cleverly, quite amazingly. And, you know, I told her, you're like a poster child for good stewardship of land. And she said, and next you're going to say, except for my 14 children. And I said, well, and she said, look, I'll bet our carbon footprint is less than the average suburban couple with a few cars and a couple kids. And she's probably right. So I read her this lovely passage about the tangled riot of vegetation that really could have been written about her yard. And she said, that's really good. And I said, yeah, it's the last page of The Origin of the Species. That's how Darwin finished up. So anyway, we go back and forth and have a good time.
I think one of the things about the Cox family too that comes into this in making a documentary film is all those butterflies you saw in that scene, in that segment. How many were there? 3, 4?
I think they tagged 3 butterflies. I think the entire film, we tagged no more than 5 or 6 butterflies.
It was a terrible year. I
Yeah.
mean, we were from Chincoteague to southern Maryland and northern Maryland, and there just weren't any butterflies.
Yeah, I went out to
coming through.
Blackwater and just to get B-roll of monarchs. One other thing, you were asking moments in the film, I think setting up Maggie Petrick, who takes eggs and caterpillars and puts them in little enclosures and grows them out to monarch butterflies and releases them, gave me some caterpillars and some milkweed and sent me home. And Barbara and I set up a set, I guess you would call it, on our screen porch. And I had twigs and things, and I super glued a chrysalis to one of them. And we would get up early in the morning because Maggie said, this is going to happen, and it's going to be quick, but it's going to happen early in the morning. So one of us would get up and Barbara would go down in her bathrobe and she'd say, nothing's happening, stay in bed. And then we finally got a couple, and some of it didn't work. I had like 3 cameras set up, and, you know, I had all kind of lights and all. And finally, you know, the one that happened, you know, again, it's 10 or 15 seconds in the film. It was like 3 weeks to shoot it, but it was fun.
I think I'm always struck by well, we could go to questions maybe if people have them.
Yeah,
Well,
keep
just-
talking.
It sounds like bragging, but the quality of the production, given our low budget and the fact that almost everything we do is one shot at it, you know, from the narration to the photography. We can't go back often. We don't have the time, the budget. Given that, it's really amazing how well it comes out.
Hi, Tom, Sandy. I'm curious, how did you pick your creatures? And I'm really curious why you did not have any anadromous creatures like the striped bass or the shad.
Swans, I think Dave and I have been following swans for a while. I've been interested in eels because they're hard to do. I mean, to really do them well, I don't know if anyone ever has. Nobody's ever photographed them. Nobody. After they leave the continental shelf, they go deep to the Sargasso, spawn thousands of feet down, and they die. We think it seems the most likely thing. So eels are mysterious. But you know, the more you get underwater, the tougher it gets. I mean, we could have done rockfish, but how do you photograph striped bass going from the Bay of Fundy down the continental shelves, eating, you know, it just gets beyond our budget.
Yeah, I think it's a question of budget and accessibility. And, you know, I don't know if anybody in here, if you're watching The Americas, which is just incredible. I mean, they do spend, they have a big crew, a big budget. Tom Hanks, narrator, we have Horton.
Yeah.
No, so it's a very different situation that they have, and we just, again, it's we have a lovely relationship with Caroline Gable, who has been our executive producer and our major funder for every film we've done. So that helps, believe me.
So talk a little bit on that. Bay Journal has been a really important source of funding for the projects, but also all of your films are available and you can stream them online. You have been major supporters and often featured filmmakers in Chesapeake Bay Week. So talk about how filmmaking meets your mission, right? That's not a common, having films readily available to stream on a website is not a common business model for most filmmakers.
Right. Well, all the films are at bayjournal.com/multimedia, and they're free, downloadable, anything you want to do with them, you know, show them to 100 people if you want. So they're all accessible, and we've been encouraging schools to use them, or at least parts of them. So that's, you know, basically the Bay Journal launders the money that comes from, you know, it's the only way we can do is have a 501c3. And then we have Barbara that is our bookkeeper, takes care of all that. But no, the money comes through to the Bay Journal, and then they pay us. So it's a very nice relationship. It's important. The Bay Journal funding is in question right now because of what's going on the federal level.
I don't think it's in question.
Yeah, well,
It's about EPA money is about a quarter of our $1 million or so budget. And even if they let us keep the money, then they'd tell us we couldn't write about climate change or pollution. So it's gone. Yeah.
so, well, we're still getting some now, but we don't know for how long. And then Maryland Public Television, it's free content for them, so they love us. They don't have to pay anything for it, and we jump through hoops and do what needs to be done to make it palatable for them. And Richard Anderson does a lot of that work, and Sandy, getting all these productions ready to show on a different medium, to show on television.
Would you like to say that louder, please?
Yeah.
Here, give me a microphone.
Actually, one thing has changed because these guys, when the film is done, they've had their fun and that's about it. They're not out to, but now we do, if someone is showing it in a community and you want one of these gentlemen to come and talk, you're going to pay for it.
Here, here.
Other questions? Oh, coming, John.
So you made mention in the film about how skittish the tundra swans are, and yet you're up very close to them. So gear-wise, what are you using, if I could ask?
I'm not very close to them, number one. Yeah, well, it's all relative, but yes, tundra swans are incredibly skittish. I was really on the learning curve with this film about using long lenses, because I'm used to using long lens, big telephotos with still images, and you just crank up the shutter speed and call it a day. You can stop anything.
Mm-hmm.
With film, you can't do that. So if there's wind and you're using a long lens and there's chatter, Sandy will say, throw it away. Richard will say, throw it away. You can't use it. So that's important. But I use a little Olympus camera. I don't use any kind of big special video camera, and just getting out in all different weather. And I have underwater housing to do for the eels. I did some underwater stuff.
So you're doing major cropping then to get that large image of those.
We're not doing
swans.
cropping, but you're doing, cropping in the camera, with the lenses. Yeah, you're moving it. And with the swans, I'm going to where they are, and as long as you sneak up on them, like at the sewage treatment lagoon in Hurlock, you can get fairly close to them. But as soon as, Tom will say, as soon as you get up on that berm, they start swimming away from
Right.
Yeah, they've got a distance. I would say it's maybe 80, 100 yards, and they'll let you get that close, but then they move. Now, it's interesting. There's
Yeah.
another species of swan, the trumpeter, that is having a mild comeback. They were shot and trapped out of the Chesapeake 200 years ago. Dave and I went out to photograph one of their nests, or where they're nesting, and we can walk right up on them. I think that's why they got shot out 200 years ago. I threw a rock at the damn swan to try to get it to fly for his camera, and they just sat there and looked at us.
All right.
Yeah, Jenny.
Swan project that was, oh, sorry. What happened to the Trumpeter Swan project?
You're referring to Bill Sladen and Bob Ferris, who was with Defenders of Wildlife. I think they had a project maybe 20 years ago they imprinted trumpeter swans to follow an ultralight plane from Warrenton, Virginia to Dorchester County. The idea was to try to teach them a new migration route. And I think it worked. Some of the swans did get the route in their mental maps, whatever they use, and got back to Warrenton. And I think it was just Ferris was going one way and Sladen was going another, and both of them could be, especially Sladen, a little, shall we say, irascible. And it just kind of fell apart. It was a good concept, but now we think these 4 or 5 pairs of trumpeters have come from a stable population in Ontario. They've been visiting the Bay a few a year for several years, but a couple years ago, for reasons we don't know, they just started to nest. And now there's 4 or 5 nesting pairs, and they're having young.
And it's good to note, I think everybody in the room knows that there's a difference between these swans and the mute swans that are the invasive species that are not wanted here.
Yeah, those are the ones that have pretty much been eradicated. They were invasive, and they don't migrate.
They were asked to leave.
We're asked to leave.
Oh my God. I would say that on this film, maybe not quite so much, but maybe 40, 50 hours. Some films.
It's a 30-minute film.
Yeah. Dave doesn't say, he's getting very good about this. He now does go through it first and take out some of it, so I don't get everything they shot, but many, many hours. And the editing process, as Richard can well attest, is a very tedious time. So doing a 30-minute film takes at least a month to put together.
So, so you start with Tom's essay that gives you the overall scope, and then there's a lot of filming that happens, a lot of interviews. You
Yeah, Tom and I
transcribe-
go out together and do interviews. And then once we have an interview, once we have most of the interviews done, it goes back to Sandy. And that's when the narrative is woven. And Sandy and Tom and I work together, most of those two, Sandy and Tom, figuring out the message, getting it down to close to what we want. Then I just spend a lot of time going out shooting B-roll, getting sound, getting a B-roll video, trying to make sense of, what we want to say, try to figure out how we say
Speaking
it.
of essays, there's a wonderful essay on eels in the Chesapeake. It was written by Rachel Carson in Under the Sea Wind, not one of her better known pieces of writing, but I would really recommend it. You can find Under the Sea Wind. And she wrote about eels leaving the Chesapeake. She probably wrote that in the 1940s. We don't know a heck of a lot more about eels than we did then.
You were asking about next films, and I think one pretty much absolute is if any one of the three of us decides we're retiring, then I think we'll all three retire from filming. I just can't see doing another film without all three of us. Just because we've worked together, we know each other well. We know good habits and bad, and it's like a marriage, I guess.
Barbara Harp calls me his work wife.
Well, I think that is the perfect place to thank you. Thank you for your contribution and your time and your memory and storytelling today. Audience, thank you for being here and celebrating Chesapeake Bay Week. I hope you'll tune in and enjoy starting on Sunday. The programming lineup will start. And I can't wait to film the 10th film with you whenever that is.
We'll see.
Thank you.